is Exodus. 400 years before. Well, let's get started. Let's have a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for an opportunity to read your word, to think about you. I pray that we are changed by the encounter, and I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're calling this class this fall Ark and Temple, and there is a wonderful model of Herod's temple in the Maloof entrance out back. It was built by Charles Ellis, who actually went with us on a pilgrimage before COVID to Israel, and he's a wonderful woodworker. And I knew that anyway. And he said, if there's anything I can make for you, and I said, yeah, make me the temple. And it's like a 1/10 scale. It's really cool. It's the temple that Herod built or rebuilt the second temple some 40 years before Jesus' birth, turning it into the wonder of the ancient world. I mean, it is really cool, and it's a cool model. So when you're way out to the car, check that out. We're not going to talk about Herod's temple today, but it'll be a handy toy to have, really, to show us sort of the grandeur of it and the importance of it. As we think about the ark and the temple, today I'd like to talk about the origins of the ark, why it exists, perhaps what it means, and get us thinking about the ark in a new way and its importance. And even with the ark's disappearance in 586 BC, to be precise, August of 586, when the Babylonians burned Jerusalem and despoiled all the treasures of the temple, including the ark itself, even with the ark's absence, it would remain important to not only the people, the nation of Israel, if you will, but also a focal point for their worship. I'm remembering a story from the Roman occupation of Judea and the governor Pompey, the general Pompey, who conquered that part of the world. And you remember the story of the Holy of Holies, where only the priests could go back there one time a year. It was the Day of Atonement, and only the high priest could go back there and make the requisite sacrifices. The ordinary people were not allowed to go back. And I even heard a story that the high priest would have like a rope tied around his leg in case he died in the Holy of Holies, and somebody pull him out because nobody go back there. Well, Pompey, being a Roman and a general, he's not going to do that. He wants to see what's back behind that curtain because he wants to haul it off, right, and take it back to the emperor. And he walks back there, and there's nothing. It's an empty room. I love that thought when I'm thinking, wow, what a strange religion. No gold, no statue, no idols, just sheer silence. So even the ark has a presence in our story, even with it gone. But we're going to talk this morning about the origins of the ark. We're going to go back to the very beginning. So I want to start with an image on the screen. And this is Jericho. There is an oasis in the Judean wilderness, which we'll return to again, down by the Jordan River. It's in the Great Rift Valley. It's a crack in the earth that goes from, say, Ethiopia all the way up into Syria. It's where two tectonic plates meet, the continents of Asia and Africa. It's very hot down there. It's the lowest place on planet Earth. But what happens with this porous rock is you have oases from winter rains and wash that will come off the high ground and will settle into deep, deep aquifers and then will bubble up into places of water and thereby safety. And for this reason, Jericho is the oldest continually occupied city on earth. It's had some sort of human habitation for 10,000 years. And Jericho, these walls that you're looking at, are a living witness to the agricultural revolution. This sounds like a mouthful, but we need to understand what this means. The agricultural revolution is a shift from some form of human existence, which really happened for about 1 million years. So when I say some form of human, obviously this is pre-Homo sapiens, but up until the agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago, human beings lived in a hunter-gatherer existence. They lived in family groups. They were egalitarian. They followed the weather around for food. They had a varied diet. And then suddenly with the domestication of wheat, that stopped. They settled down. And one might be tempted to think of that as an upgrade, but it's not. And Genesis chapters 1 through 11, I believe, are a poetic rendering of this movement from a hunter-gatherer existence to living in a city. Think about what the stories that you know. Genesis 1 and 2 are about life in a garden. But when you get to Genesis chapter 11, they're building the Tower of Babel. And if you read the story closely, the sin is not the tower. The sin is that they stopped. They settled down. God commanded them to travel the earth, meaning to live in this form of humanity. But no, they stopped and they built cities. Why would I say that it's not an upgrade? Well, suddenly, and I want you just to look at this wall and think about this change in humanity for a second. Suddenly, human beings are stratified. One person gets to be the king, but that's just only one king. You know, there are a lot of slaves in a city, a lot of people who aren't on top. It was crushing work. Perhaps what had been, you know, a 20-hour, 30-hour work week as a hunter-gatherer now is a 60, 70, 80-hour work week. Now they had a limited diet. I had a physician tell me here at the church that there's some very good reading on our own evolutionary development of diseases because of our limited diet from the agricultural revolution. Things like diabetes or things like scurvy. I mean, all sorts of things that don't happen for animals, that happen for us because we only ate bread. And isn't it interesting that Jesus would say he would quote Deuteronomy and say when the devil tempted him in the wilderness, man shall not live by bread alone, right? And so, but they did. They lived by bread alone. And then living in the city, you've got to have an army to guard the wheat. You've got to have slaves to pick the wheat. And then you've got to be dependent upon rain or water. And this is an important backstory in the Bible. If you missed my podcast last year, we talked about living water, which is water as a story that drives all the other stories. And of course, water is a story here in Jericho as well. But the whole golden calf thing in the Old Testament, that's a rain god. So there's a logic, but they're not just ignorant ancient people. There's a logic behind what they're trying to do and their worship. They're trying to hedge. Even God's people, the Hebrews, oftentimes would fall into idolatrous behavior because they were afraid. If you don't get rain over the winter, your crops won't die. I mean, your crops won't grow, and then you'll die. Okay, in this world, in this shift of behavior from moving around and following the weather and having a varied diet to something more fixed, some 5,000 years ago, writing was invented. And this is an important development in the story, writing. Originally, writing was used to record grain and grain inventory and grain purchases from city to city. Eventually, writing would be used to secure the dynasty, and they would proclaim their own kings divine. And that's how you kept the king on top and everybody else in line. And so they would have writing to tell these stories, propaganda, if you will. I think the Egyptians were really the master of that with their own hieroglyphics to proclaim the king divine. You know, we all know enough about Egyptian things, Egyptology, from popular culture to know that they believed in the afterlife, right? What you might not know is that for most of Egypt's history, the afterlife was reserved for the king alone. That's not for us, okay? That's just for the rich dude with the boat that goes across the river, right? Unless you're lucky and you get to be a slave to serve the king in the afterlife. So this is what writing had become. Now, I'm really talking about a lot of prehistory here because in Genesis chapter 12, which I believe to be the beginning of the story of us. It's not Genesis 1, it's Genesis 12. Abraham is asked to leave a city. You get what that means now? He leaves a city behind to begin a new form of human existence. In other words, Abraham is God's chance at a do-over, to do life the way that it was meant to be lived, in communion with each other, in union with God and with each other, equal neighbors. Justice is important. Children are important. Inheritance is important. A relationship with God is important. And the book of Genesis records Abraham as a nomad, traveling back and forth with his extended family between two fixed, what I call water dynasties, Mesopotamia in the north and the east, which the word Mesopotamia means between the rivers, and then the Nile River in the south and the west, the Egyptian dynasties, which lasted for 1,000 years because of this abundance of water. So with water comes power, both of these with lots of water. Now, knowing what we know now about cities and settling down and power, we can appreciate the grandeur of this place, right? We can appreciate the grandeur of Egypt. Now, in time, we're told in our Bibles that Abraham's family, as they moved back and forth, were caught up in a famine. So they traveled to this place, to Egypt, to avoid starving, and in time they became enslaved peoples because this is what cities do. I'm trying to make the point here that cities are not God's intention for us, and I don't mean I enjoy living in Birmingham as much as you do, but we also know that cities are places of food deserts. Cities are places of homelessness. Cities are places where people are left behind and forgotten. So cities can be very far from God's intention for us. And maybe the best thing our churches can do is to be a glimpse of the way that life should be lived. Mutuality, loving God and loving each other, watching out for each other. I was on the phone at 6 o'clock this morning with a parishioner who lost his mama. These are the things that we do, right, for each other, so that we can somehow model that life in the garden that God intended for us. But God's people were enslaved. And as I was pointing out before we started this class, on our timeline here, if 2000 BC is Abraham, 1500 BC is the escape from this hellish place, Egypt, where they were all enslaved. Archaeologists will argue over our lack of evidence of the Exodus. They will say that there's not any extra biblical writing that they can really find. Although in my sermon this morning, if you're paying close attention, I said the biblical writer of Exodus isn't interested in giving you any specific history. He's just an unnamed Pharaoh. He's not even important. It's just King is his name. King. Doesn't matter what his name is. God gets the name in the Exodus story. I am. God has a name. Pharaoh doesn't have a name because Pharaoh is more important. God is more important than that. But I do have two possibilities because I'm of the camp that I believe the Exodus really happened. First of all, I don't think that any Pharaoh would admit to losing a Pharaoh's investment in terms of slaves. I don't think they would put that on a hieroglyphic because that's not why writing was used up until that point. And secondly, wandering camps don't leave any evidence behind. So you can go out into the sand. You're not really going to find any evidence of their wandering in the wilderness. But we're told that God would give them freedom. And out in the desert and away from the pyramids, God would take them up to a natural mountain, which I think is absolutely important. I think God wanted to show them something that God made as opposed to something that human beings would make. And God would use this new technology. We've landed the plane now, Rich. This 5,000 year old technology would use this new technology, writing, to convey the divine mind to them. Now, if writing up to this point had been used for inventory and then also to proclaim the King divine, then God would convey 10 commandments or 10 ends or 10 priorities of God for God's people. 4 of these are union with God. 4 of these are to keep us in a right relationship with our Creator. The next 6 keep us in a right relationship with our neighbor. In other words, the 10 commandments enable us to go back to the garden. And that's what we're saying here, to go back to God's original dream for us, the dream that was lost when we settled for something that we could create, but rather something in trust of God and in trust with each other and in love with God and in love with each other. We also know that Moses, and this is going to be important for the existence of the ark, we also know that Moses destroyed that first set of 10 commandments. Do you remember the story? We've all seen the movie, right, with Edward G. Robinson. Where's your God now, Moses? And right, they make a golden calf and they dance around it, and Moses is so angry, he breaks the tablets against the side of the mountain. But God gives him a second chance. And if you're reading the text closely in Exodus chapter 34, what we're told is that the second time the 10 commandments are created, God lets Moses choose the rock as opposed to choosing it completely, divine choosing. He lets Moses choose the rock so that they're working together on this second chance. They're working together on this second set of commandments. Both of these will be carried in the ark. The dust of the original broken tablets and then the tablets themselves will be carried within a box. Now, I've got a cool little, I have lots of Baptist clip art for stuff like this, but these are 2 Aaronite, descendants of Aaron, Aaronite priests worshiping before the ark. If you want to know specifics about the ark, you can go to Exodus chapter 37. We're told that it was a chest of acacia wood covered in gold with an elaborate lid called the mercy seat, which had 2 cherubim on the top. It was carried by poles, which is very important, and it was always covered when it was moved, so that only the priest could see it. Now, this is a key point. God wanted their religion to be very intentional but still nimble, but still very intentional. The danger of making something portable is sometimes it loses it's reverence, right? And so there are parts of the story in the scriptures which remind you again and again that this ark must be revered, even dangerous. Joshua would actually be commanded to take the ark across the Jordan River, and it would dry up so that God's people could walk across into dry land, and knock down the walls of Jericho, which we just visited in our first slide. It would rest for 369 years at a place called Shiloh in the north, until we're told in 1 Samuel chapter 4 that it was lost in battle. What happened is the last of the high priest of the tabernacle, the tent that would carry the ark, his name was Eli, and he had two sons who were terrible guys, Phinehas and Hophni. They would steal the sacrifices from people. They would steal the fatling portions to be sacrificed. They were just scoundrels and rapscallions. And then one day, in the heat of a battle, they decided to take the ark like a totem, like a Joshua, if you will, without any calling from God, into this battle, and they lose it. Both sons lose their lives, and when Eli learns that the ark is gone from God's people, he dies on the spot. So we're told in 1 Samuel chapter 5 that the Philistines now hot potato the ark from place to place to place with various calamities that would fall upon them. And we know what happens because we've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you don't want that thing, right? Well, this is exactly what happens in Scripture until they return it to Bet Shemesh in 1 Samuel chapter 6. So I want to show you something. It's a picture some of you have seen before. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing I've ever seen, and this is not open to the public. Upon this rock, the Ark of the Covenant rested in 1 Samuel chapter 6. You are looking at a place where the Ten Commandments sat. Now, you might say, Rich, how do you know that? Well, fortunately, I've got some archaeologist friends who point out carbon-14 dating, so dating to right before 1000 BC, so right here in the timeline here. It dates to the place. It is a chapel built around a stone that is the same dimensions of the ark in Exodus chapter 37. There is sacrificial smoke and 2 sacrificial stones for animals to be sacrificed in front of it. What we think, or what my friends think, is that this is a little bit of a George Washington slept here kind of thing, that this rock, because it had the Ten Commandments upon it, had a chapel built around it, and for many, many years people would worship where the ark had once rested. It will be one day a national treasure. Right now, it just sits out in the weather across from a gas station. So in January, when I took this picture, this picture is taken. I've been different seasons of the year. Edon and I go out there and look at it and pray and think big thoughts. It's degraded to the point I can't take you there because you've got to kind of slide down a hill to get to it. It's not safe for groups. It will be a park one day, and they will have a replica of this rock out there. But right now, that's just the rock sitting out there in the rain. And that's a winter picture because there's grass that's growing right there. It's not green any other time of the year. So Edon and I are sitting out there, and my son Copeland, and we're thinking big thoughts and talking about Ten Commandments things and Ark things. And suddenly a bus rolls up, and I thought, oh crap, they found it. And so they get out of the bus and they walk right by us, and the preacher is telling Samson stories because Samson is from the same part of the world. And I thought, great, they don't know about it yet. And so they walk right by us and tell Samson stories. Then another bus gets out, and I thought, oh, here we go. And they came out and they said, where is the Byzantine Church of the Glorious Martyr, which was a church that was built near that site? And again, I was like, shoo. And so the whole world is just walking by, and that's a sermon in itself, right? How God can be right under our noses, and we just never, ever, ever see. I want you to look at this one more time. The Ten Commandments sat upon that rock, and we have good scientific evidence to believe that the ark eventually rested there. However, I'm trying to make the point that just because it was portable didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. So we're told in 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 19, the descendants of Jeconiah did not rejoice with the people of Bet Shemesh when they greeted the ark of the Lord. And that word greeted is an odd Hebrew word, so they think that it may not mean that they greeted the ark of the Lord. It may mean that they pulled up the cover and looked down in it because they wanted to see what was in there. And God killed 70 of them. Oops, don't look at it, okay? And so just because it's portable doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. Later in the story, in 2 Samuel chapter 6, some poor guy named Uzzah. Have you ever heard this story that they're taking the ark to the newly created capital city of Jerusalem, and some men stumble, and poor Uzzah, he's like, I'll give you a hand, and he touches the pole, and he falls down dead. Don't touch the thing, okay? Don't look at the thing. And by the way, I've never touched that rock. So Solomon would build a house for it, which is the purpose of this class, ark and temple. Perhaps the temple was there not only to hallow it, but also to protect people from it, right, until it would disappear forever. But the ark still remains in our imaginations. As I began this little talk with you guys, I talked about the empty room, the Holy of Holies, if you will, the presence of God, even though they lost the ark. You know, people wonder, is the ark in a like the movie, is it locked away somewhere in a warehouse? Has it been hidden? Did somebody steal it? Is it in the basement of the Vatican? You know, where might the ark be? I have a feeling that people being who people are, I think the ark probably got just burned up and boiled down. It was just a piece of gold to the Babylonians. They didn't care. For the exile, they believed that if they destroyed your God, then you had no hope. It was a my God can beat up your God kind of thing. They didn't care. It was a celestial flex move for them to tear down their temple so that God would take away their hope. What happens then in 586 BC is that the reason why this story is so important is they're way off in Babylon. They're all alone. They're sitting by the river and they're crying their eyes out, and suddenly God calls a prophet. Uh-oh, I didn't need a box. And I had a box and I had the 10 Commandments because I want you to live, but you've got those written in your heart now, right? You've got 10 Commandments. You are the tablets of the 10 Commandments now, not stone. I'll write with my finger on your heart. I'll write 4 ways to be in love with each other and 4 ways to be in love with me and 6 ways to be in love with each other. And God called a prophet way out there. And then they wrote the Bible down way out there. And then they went home without it. But that's okay because they still had it inside. Okay. Fast forward to the Gospels. The world of Jesus, these 10 ends, these 10 priorities, these 10 commandments have become 613. And we all know that we can find a way to not love somebody if we've got a loophole, right? And so God in the fullness of time becomes one of God's own creation, and after his own baptism and before the beginning of his ministry, goes into the wilderness to pray. I've got a picture. You know, oftentimes we think of a wilderness as woods and water. It's not. In this barren land, this is the land around Jericho. It's very interesting that they have limestone rocks everywhere that are the sizes of loaves of bread. So you really get a visual for this. It's not Saharan desert. It's rock desert. It's limestone desert. Very dusty, very hot, very dangerous. We're told that for 40 days, which is a biblical way of just saying God's time, Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted. And I don't think it's any mistake that he's tempted in the shadow of Jericho. Remember Genesis 1 through 11. Begins in a garden, ends in a city. And in the shadow of a city, Jesus is tempted by the devil. The 3 temptations. The first one is sustenance, food, turn these stones into bread. The second one is certain, according to Matthew. Luke switches the order. According to Matthew, the second temptation is certitude. Throw yourself down from the pinnacle of the temple, and angels will bear you up. And then the third one is control. Bow down to me, and all these kingdoms I will give to you. All of these are 3 basic appetites. I think another problem with humanity, the way we've sort of fallen away from God's dream for us, is we've become enslaved to appetites. This is another thing that the city promises. A city promises which can't deliver, which you can have anything you want. That's not healthy. That's not a healthy way to be. Some of the most unhappy people that we all know are people that can have anything that they want, and the appetites eventually will consume them. So Jesus subsumes his own human appetites to show us how to be a new form of humanity, something back according to the original dream. And in Jerusalem today, on the southwest corner, is the pinnacle. That is a real place. Archaeologists found a stone that had fallen from the top of the Temple Mount when the Romans destroyed it, called the place of trumpeting. What they believe is because it's the highest place on the Temple Mount, that trumpeters would call the faithful to worship from that place. And in the second temptation, according to Matthew's gospel, Jesus is taken to the top of this place that you're looking here. Throw yourself down from the pinnacle, and his angels will bear you up. Beneath the pinnacle are first century steps that you can see today. And they're steps that Jesus had been dragged up when he was arrested. They were also the steps that he walked up the night that he shared a last meal with his friends. And when you walk up these steps, you have to think, did he look up? In chains from the temple police, did he look up? Did he look up and remember? Did he look up and remember that he didn't have to do this? The devil promised. Did he look up and remember that he did not have to go the distance? Did he look up and remember that the nails did not have to hurt? But he did it. He did it for you and for me to show us a better way of being human. The ark, in many ways, was simply intended, I believe, to be God's presence with them, to remind them that God would always be near, remind them that they would have something to look to or to return to. When the ark was lost, they realized that they still had everything they needed. They had each other. So this is my thoughts, some thoughts on the ark, and I'm going to turn off my microphone so that you can ask me questions if you like, and it won't be on the internet. Thanks, everybody.